Hey, this is Pastor Mark. On today's episode of the Fultondale First Podcast, I sit down with my friend Jay Stewart. Jay is over the Cooperative Program and financial planning resources for our Alabama Baptist State Board of Missions. And so we talk a lot about how your giving and your generosity make an eternal impact. I'm so excited about this episode. I will tell you this, there's a portion, kind of the last third of the episode, where the audio kind of messes up a little bit. One of our mics went out, so you'll hear that, but it's still a great discussion and a great episode, and I'm glad you're here for it.
Welcome to the Fultondale First Podcast. Our mission at Fultondale First is to love God, love people, and make disciples. And this podcast is aimed to help you join that mission. Thanks for joining us for this episode.
Welcome to this episode of the Fultondale First Podcast, and I am sitting here with a good friend and a person who really you need to know. That's why he's sitting here in this chair. Jay Stewart, and he works with the State Board of Missions, and he works with Cooperative Program Giving, and he works with Church Financial Resources. And so, Jay, welcome to the podcast. Glad you're here.
Yeah, man, it's great to have the opportunity to be with you today. Been looking forward to this.
Awesome. So Jay served as a pastor for a long time, and so we're kind of kindred spirits in that way. He has a heart of a pastor still, and at serving at the State Board of Missions. So Jay, tell us a little bit. I want our folks to get to know you, and so tell us a little bit about your story, how God got you where you are now, and talk a little bit about your role in the office.
Yeah, so I was called to the ministry and didn't really know what that looked like. I was raised in church. I was saved at a young age, vacation Bible school, gave my life to Christ
awesome.
when I was actually 7 years old. My mom had raised me to be in church and had heard the gospel and responded to it at a pretty young age. And to be honest, loved to be at church growing up. It was a place that I enjoyed to be at, and God was really just so good to me in so many ways. And as I got to late high school and in college, I was kind of wrestling with the call to ministry and what that looked like. Kind of a weird reverse psychology on myself kind of thing. I overanalyzed probably, but I resisted that call a little bit because I actually wanted to do it. So I felt like then that was probably not what I was supposed to be doing, like it was me. Yep. And I finally came to the point where I realized that God was the one who put that love of being in church and serving the church in my heart. And so I actually went to Jacksonville State as a music major.
Jacksonville State.
Yeah.
Well,
JSU.
you know what? There's grace in the kingdom.
You're a Troy guy.
Jack State and Troy, longtime rivals.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and then being in the music department, we learned a lot about that whole rivalry and the bands and all of those things. And so I was a vocal major. So the first part of my ministry was spent in music and youth ministry. I served at a church part-time during college as their choir director, and then served a church in Rainbow City, White Springs Baptist Church, as their youth and music minister. Served at a church in Georgia for about 6 years in essentially the same role. Came back to Gadsden to pastor at Dwight Baptist Church in 2009. So I spent about 12 and a half years on student and music ministry side of things, worship leadership. And from Dwight Baptist, served there about 4.5 years. Then I served another 8 years at First Baptist Church, Asheville, in St. Clair Association. And then in 2022, came to the State Board of Missions. So, it was one of those things I honestly probably never would have expected. But extremely excited to be serving in the role that I'm in, particularly as it connects to missions. And so really just loving doing what I'm doing.
That's awesome. And every time I ask somebody a question like that, whether they're in ministry or a church member, church leader or whatever, it seems like that's the common thread. It's, God weaves things that we never expect and gets us where he wants us to be when we never thought that's where we'd be. And that's kind of what God does.
Definitely. You mentioned about the pastor's heart, and I would say when people ask me, it's a complicated question to answer because they're like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Well," and I'm a preacher, and I'm a pastor, whichever might come out first. I sort of view those things interchangeably, but I will look back. My heroes were deacons, my minister of music, Bill Drummond's, my youth pastor, Mike Jackson. who is now my boss.
That's right.
And he, along with Dr. Lance, and so I look back at those people. It invested in my life so much. And they were pastors, and they were directors of missions, now associational mission strategists, and those kinds of people. So that's where God has me now. And so now I get to try to invest and encourage in pastors' lives. I know, and we'll talk more here in a little bit about the cooperative program, but I really view my role as much of an encourager to pastors as anything in churches.
Yeah, and that's needed. I mean, obviously, that's needed. So let's talk about the cooperative program. So that's a word we use a lot. And some of the people listening and watching may know exactly what we talk about when we're talking about cooperative program. Some may have no idea. So if you are part of Fultondale First, we say this a lot, but 8%, 10% of everything you give, we tithe on as a church, right? So 8% of every dollar you give, we actually get to use that to support global missions, state missions through the cooperative program. And then, of course, 2% is with our associational missions as well. So the cooperative program is exactly that. It's churches cooperating together. So, Jay, tell us a little bit about what the cooperative program is, how does it work, and really what is it for?
Yeah, so I love the question. It's probably the most obvious question to ask for someone in my role, because as the director for the Office of Cooperative Program, I get to explain that a lot. And to be honest, I have wrestled with that so much, because in part it's an extremely simple answer, is that we are better together.
That's right.
And so we, as Alabama Baptists, and of course Southern Baptists, have doctrinal beliefs and common ideas about how to share the gospel and how it works and how important missions is. We like to talk about, and we do talk often, that with the State Board of Missions, is that we have one mission. It's the Great Commission.
That's right.
And we have one program, the Cooperative Program. And of course, there are many ministries that flow out of that. But at its simplest form is that we pool our resources to multiply them. The mean church size in Alabama, for Alabama Baptists anyway, is about 50, give or take.
Yep.
So it's always funny to me when people say, I go to a small church. Well, you probably go to a normal sized church.
Right, that's right.
And in a lot of cases, probably larger churches. Yeah. But you take all those 3,200 roughly Alabama Baptist churches, and between 40 and 50,000 Southern Baptist churches, and all of a sudden, the gifts of the 8% from your church and the 10% from this church, and the other dollars that come in from all of these churches, it's more than just added together, it's multiplied. And so I like to say that it's more than just the money, but it is a way that we have a system to use that money. And in many years, some of y'all may be familiar with this term, it's the financial fuel for the Great Commission. And one of the things that I have been seeking to do in my role is to help educate and to celebrate. The education part comes in kind of clearing up some of the confusions that may be out there, because a lot of Alabama Baptists have at least heard of the cooperative program, but there's a lot of misconceptions about what it actually is. And then if they do know, then I want to help celebrate what God is doing in the missions and ministries that those monies and your dollars help provide for.
Absolutely. Like, one of the things probably people would think, at least in our day and age, when they hear about, cooperative, ministry, or, a funding that's several people giving to one fund, kind of the skeptic, rises up in some, and they will say something like, well, how much of that really is used for ministry and missions? I mean, you're paying a lot of admin costs, right? Because that's what we've been trained to think in our day and age. So maybe answer that question. How much or is a lot spent on admin costs, or how much is really being used for ministry?
Right. So yeah, we do get that question, and then to me, and I'd have a tendency to overcomplicate things at times, but I do think it's a complicated question to answer, because I think at the heart of what the question is, are we using our money wisely?
Yep.
And the answer to that is a resounding yes. So to get in the weeds a little bit, which is obviously what we want to do. So when you give from your church here in Fultondale, 50 cents of every dollar is forwarded to the Southern Baptist side, and 50 cents of those dollars are used through the State Board of Missions. And we'll talk about the Southern Baptist side for a minute. Of that amount of money, 73 point, and I don't know the exact numbers. It's actually a little larger than that, but the vast majority of that goes to either North American or international missions. The seminaries get their portions, and you go on down from there. The executive committee, which would be, for lack of a better term, the business administrative side of things, is 2.99%. So less than 3% of the money that they receive, which is only half of the money that you're giving. So you're going to say less than 1.5%. Of those dollars are going for the administrative costs. And within the State Board of Missions, our goal is to be very good stewards of the money that our people are giving. And so very, very little of the money is used for what people may think of as administrative cost. But I even want to somewhat push back on that, because I think a better term, and this is not to correct you because you've asked the perfect question, but I think in our mindset is, what is the cost of doing ministry?
That's right. I was going to push back too, because I tell people, if I ever hear that, is there are no administrative costs.
You took the words right out of my mouth. It's all
ministry.
You really took the words right out of my mouth, because when we're looking at it in specifics, we don't think about it in terms of administrative costs. And I could list 1,000 things, but when you have a power bill, well, that's just part of doing ministry in the 21st century. And nobody's going to be running, in the dark, and, and they're going to have cell phones. And so I would say that our offices are very conscious of how we spend our money and making sure that it is getting into the lives of people. And that's the other thing too. Our greatest resource are human resources.
Right.
So the ministries, every church either has or needs a pastor. Well, the vast majority of those resources are going to be invested in that pastor, rightfully so, because they are going to lead the church. They're going to be the hands-on minister that's in those hospital rooms and leading the church in a business sense or in an administrative sense. So I definitely think the idea is their waste, and I would say nothing's perfect.
Right.
But we're working toward that as hard as we possibly can. And the other thing too, and this wasn't your question, but I think it's implied a little bit. We have a tremendous set of checks and balances within our accounting system, and every dime that a church gives, we can give an account for.
Yep.
And if churches, that's part of my role. If your church, if you're watching this and you want to know how much of our dollars goes to whatever ministries that they support, and it's a lot. In terms of a lot of ministries, we can give you down to the penny where those dollars are going. And I heard this said the other day, and Steve Dunn and I were in a conversation. You probably know Steve. He mentioned this. He said, if the Great Commission is on your mind, then partnership is on your mind, or cooperation is on your mind. And I thought, what a great picture.
Well said, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, man, I don't know if you came up with that or not, but I'm stealing that. I'm going to use that because it's true. And so with that means there's going to be some sort of a system in place.
That's right.
And the system that we have in place, it's genius. It really is. It's an interesting thing in studying leadership right now currently and looking at what the trends are. The trends in leadership are toward more collaboration, not less.
That's right.
Whether it's open sourced kind of things online, people putting their ideas together, because I mean, again, we're better together.
We are better together, and I love that. And so, again, if you're watching or listening to this, and this is maybe informative for you or new to you, if you know me, I'm a skeptic, right? That's just my nature, my personality, and I wholeheartedly agree with what Jay said, and I support this cooperative funding, the cooperative program, with all of my heart. And because I've seen it, and I know that it's accountable. I know that it's effective. And so let's talk about that for a minute, because we've been talking about, questions and money and stuff like that, but let's talk about lives. Let's talk about transformation, because really, when I think about cooperative program, that's what I think about. I think about transformation of lives, of communities, of people. And so I want you to share a little bit about, if somebody came up to you and said, Jay, what difference does it really make, right? My giving, what difference does, some churches may think, well, we don't give much, or, some churches say, well, we give a lot, what difference does it really make as we give to the cooperative program? Where have you seen God work?
So I can think of about 3 or 4 examples that come to mind really, really quickly. One of them comes connected to your office, out of our office of Sunday School and Discipleship. I think about VBS, and that's close to my heart because that's where I was saved, and probably a lot of our viewers were saved
That's
there.
Right.
The statistic that I read early on as I was in this role was that there is essentially a 1-to-1 correlation between workers trained for VBS and salvations. I thought, what
Wow.
more of a powerful stat could we have where if our churches train another person statistically, there's going to be another child come to know Christ. Well, one of the roles in our State Board of Missions is to help train VBS workers.
Right.
Every year there are training sessions that happen that are coordinated through y'all's office and through the State Board of Missions, and really through your office if you're giving through the Cooperative Program.
That's right.
So when you're giving to that and people are being trained and more children are coming to know Christ, which at last check, it's still the greatest single evangelistic outreach event we have every year.
Absolutely.
So that's one example. And the other thing comes to mind is our 17 campus ministries, or ministers, I should say. So our colleges throughout the state of Alabama have campus ministers, and they are ministering to students at one of the most pivotal points in their lives. I mean, the statistics on the deconstruction and students leaving their faith in college is staggering and scary. Those campus ministers are there. My heart is really passionate about that ministry for one reason is because it's so effective and so needed, but also because I have 2 children that are, one just graduated from college recently and the other one's about to graduate here in about 3 weeks. I see and hear every month. I wish that our listeners and viewers could see and hear the testimonies every month. As we're recording this, we're getting ready to have one of those birthday lunches, and the campus ministers come, and every month we hear of students who've given their lives to Christ on campus, of students who are being discipled on their campus, and students who are going out and doing missions during their spring breaks or during their summer, in between semesters and during their summers off, even during Christmas breaks. And they're going to local places, they're going to more regional places, and they're actually going doing international missions. And of course, we see disaster relief. That is both, it's a both and with disaster relief ministry, because you're ministering to the physical needs that people have and giving that cup of cold water in the name of Jesus, but also the gospel tracts that are given with every gift card that's given, and certainly the chaplains that are there praying with those people, not only for their salvation but for their hurts and their loss and all of those things. It really is being the hands and feet of Jesus. I think about our entities that we support that are involved in orphan and widow care. The Bible is very plain that that's part of our ministry.
That's right.
And something that comes to mind as the connection with local churches and our state board, and certainly our international and North American mission boards and the seminaries, we're all called to do all the things of ministry, but churches have personalities and they have strengths and weaknesses. And in my traveling around and talking to churches, what I've found is some churches gravitate towards certain ministries because the people that are in their church are gifted, or they have an opportunity. God is working in those areas and they're joining him, as we've talked about in years past. And so you see those things, but in the strengths that they have, there may be some other areas that maybe they aren't able, or maybe haven't gotten a footing or traction in those other areas that we're all supposed to be doing. But no one church can really do everything all the time. Right. But when you are investing a portion of your gifts and tithes and offerings that you do, you're helping minister in those ways that you might not be directly doing as a church. And something I like to talk with churches about, there's a tendency sometimes to want to pick one or the other. But with Cooperative Program, it's a both and. You can do ministry right here in Fultondale, right here in your local area or the Birmingham area. And even the state and your church can do direct missions and partnerships and things. But the other areas that you may not be as strong in, you're investing in those as well. Right. And the Great Commission and, of course, Acts 1.8, it's not an either or, it's a both and. That's right. 24/7.
Yeah, starting here, going all, and that is, to me, that's the beauty of what we get to do. Mm-hmm. God calls us to make a difference where we are, but He also calls us to make a difference in the nations. And look, some of you may be able to go on an international mission trip. We're taking one, in a few weeks, but most of us can't or won't be able to. But we can have an impact here in Alabama, in North America, around the world, simply because what you said, we are better together. And what a great way, to make a difference. So, man, that's encouraging. That's exciting to think about. And a lot of you probably had no idea you had that kind of impact just by giving.
Yeah, Mark, something that you just mentioned, I have had this conversation with pastors and church members, and I have yet to have one person look at me and think or say, no, that's not a good idea, I don't like that. Most times, even people who aren't Southern Baptists, they look at what we're doing and how we're doing it, and they say, you know what, it's actually a great idea. Yeah. And it is. And so, I feel like just an awesome job because I get to brag on what God's doing around the world to churches and help encourage them by that. And I mentioned about being an encouragement to pastors. We have offices that help with church health and pastors in need. There's counseling, and we could just go on and on and on. It's an extremely simple idea, but it is an extremely deep and wide network of churches and pastors. And those dollars are multiplied, the work is multiplied, the prayers and the support is multiplied. It's just it's super, super encouraging.
And multiplication is one of our values in our church, and we're talking about that in action. Yeah. So, what are some ways that we can have more of an impact? Whether it be giving or through prayer or whatever. What are some things that, in addition to just doing what we're doing already, what are some ways we can have more of an impact?
Yeah. So I mentioned about celebrate and educate. Mm-hmm. I think folks that are watching this to try to do the best they can to educate themselves, so that when someone in their church or someone out in the community is talking about missions and ministry, you can have an idea of what actually the Cooperative Program is and be able to say, this is what it is, and explain to them and share just in your own words. One of the things I like to do when I go to a conference or some sort of training or a missions event is I will get people in pairs and I will say, take about 30, 45 seconds, kind of that elevator pitch, so to speak, explain to them what the Cooperative Program is. And then I tell them, if you can do that, then you need to come do my job, because it's really hard to do. But to be able to articulate well, so I think finding out and educating yourself, we've got a website that will help do that with alabamacp.org. It's found under the ministries tab there on the Alabama State Board of Missions website.
We'll link that in the show notes.
Yeah. And there's a lot of training tools that are on there. There's videos and things that help educate people. The other thing I would, just from a tangible standpoint, for the last few years, we've been doing a prayer calendar. It's a 52-week desk prayer calendar that highlights the missions and ministries that are supported through your Cooperative Program giving. And it's been like, I think, a double blessing. For one, it connects us in prayer to those ministries. I am convicted continually over the need to pray more. We all say this and we know this, but there is power in prayer, and we are nothing without God's power. And so certainly believers have the Spirit of God in their lives, but when we come together in prayer, so praying for those ministries is huge, but it also helps educate, and it's like, well, what is this? Well, take this, look through it, and when you see ministries, that's the way that your dollars are being used for the kingdom of God and investing in the kingdom. And so those would be a couple of ways that I could, encourage people, to just be a part. And then the other thing I would say is to be active. Something that I've found in our younger generations is not only the willingness and desire to be involved in giving for ministries, because younger generations are actually very generous. Yeah. They want to give to things that are bigger than them and go further than them. They want to be involved as well. And so there are ways that through your church right here and through the State Board of Missions that you can be involved in these ministries to not only give and support, but also to go and be a part. You can be on a disaster relief team, or you can go and partner with some of our IMB or NAM missionaries or church plants here in Alabama to pray with them. And there's just countless ways to be involved. So in your giving and educating yourself on these things, and certainly in prayer, support, and going.
Absolutely. Well said. That is awesome. We are definitely better together. And again, if you want to have more of an impact, Jay just gave you lots of ways to do it. And that's what God calls us to do. He calls us to go. He calls us to pray. He calls us to give. And, as we grow and know God more, generosity should grow because we're trusting Him and we're seeing Him work all over the place. So, Jay, thank you so much for coming up here and spending some time with me and helping our people understand really how their giving and prayer and going really does make a difference. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your church. I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate your friendship, and I look forward to many days in the future of deepening that relationship. And as you watch this and as you listen to us, if we can ever be of any kind of help for church or certainly even individual members from the State Board of Missions perspective, we are there. We serve you guys. That's our goal, is to support churches and support the Great Commission.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. And thank you for watching and listening. And I know you're encouraged, and I can't wait to see what God does through this and how He uses you to have more of an impact on the world around us. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode. Help us spread the word about the podcast by sharing on socials too. Thanks again, and we'll see you next episode.